you don't mind, and I'll try to screen share again. The next item is emergency communication systems in Mendocino County, and I am not an expert on this subject, but Brent Blazer, Ted Williams, and Kathy Wiley are, as far as I know. So with that, I'll just open the floor to anyone who wants to present the problem and work towards solutions. Thank you.
This is Brent. I'm new to the group. Supervisor Williams, if you'd like to kick it off, or if you'd like me to go first, I want to be respectful to the group. But I do have some thoughts. I just kind of, again, as a new guy, I'm kind of typed out a couple thoughts as I'm hearing you guys speak, and I can kind of give you where some of the challenges are that I'm seeing, and then some of the things we're working towards. And then I'd really like to address the comments about San Francisco not getting it, and things that I've thought for years I think might help this group leverage in a couple different areas. So if it's appropriate now, I'll just start rattling on. Otherwise, I'll wait till you call on me.
I think it's appropriate for you to begin now. I would just add that the county's emergency communication system for law enforcement, fire, EMS is literally held together by cardboard and duct tape in some cases. There has been insufficient investment over the years, not much redundancy. They've had to helicopter in propane tanks. The concrete is crumbling on the buildings. Hasn't had the upkeep that it needs. It's $1 million, several $1 million of deferred maintenance that needs to be considered. There is an IT master plan that addresses some of the planning elements, but it hasn't been backed with adequate funding yet. The grand jury report, I think, helped build some momentum, and we got full board support on a response last Tuesday, committing to some concrete next steps. And one of those next steps is looking at cost recovery for other agencies that are using the county's infrastructure. I think there may be over $1 million a year, depending how we calculate it. If we calculate, say CHP's proportional use of the tower based on the maximum users that we could host, or do we calculate it based on their use relative to the other current users? Somewhere between $1.2 and $1.6 million a year. And so over a decade, that's a substantial maintenance budget. And it's a mystery why we've been giving state agencies a free ride on our infrastructure for all these years. But I think it's a good time to make a transition and ask for cost recovery, just as other agencies would ask the county if we were placing our equipment on their towers. And then last, you may have heard Jeff and I participated in a call with SpaceX about Starlink. Technically, they can deploy now. We're waiting on county council to agree to some terms in an NDA. And they're willing to consider maybe one or two small towns. I think Comchi may be an ideal candidate as a proof of concept. There's some issues about billing that they may want to do combined billing for the trial run before the full public rollout. I think we should be able to find a way to make that work. Maybe we can find an entity to partner with. But this will bring essentially cable modem speeds and low latency to areas that have historically been underserved or completely unserved. The latency is about 30 milliseconds. The new satellites are only about 340 miles versus the 22,500 miles of the legacy satellites. The initial speeds were reported to be 100 megabits down, 25 megabits up. Real world tests that I've seen show that the speeds are nowhere near that. Maybe it's a third to half, but it's still so much better than what many of these areas have had. Brent, go ahead.
Thank you, Supervisor Williams. That was really on point, and I think at a really good level, and I'm kind of gauging where we're at. I can give you kind of some of the challenges I see in emergency services. Of course, Michelle made some great points. I mean, bottom line, public safety piggybacks off the infrastructure, right? So we're in internal and external communications are key. And we see significant issues with being able to maneuver our units, our patrols, our fire, communicating needs back to dispatch, and then being able to build messaging to get public information out. Obviously, those were limitations of the infrastructure before, and now with telecommuting and everything else that we're seeing, kids going to school, that bandwidth is even more narrow than before. Even just the other week with the Covelo fire and such, we had agencies not able to communicate, people not able to call 911, things like that, and that reflects on all of us, because then the public calls our office and says, "Hey, I didn't get the notification," and they don't understand all the complexities of from how they register all the way to did the infrastructure support it. We are using some of the best tools. I can tell you that there's bigger, more wealthy counties that do not have some of the alert and warning tools that we have. Yet we're using them, but we're going to be limited by the infrastructure and the different service providers that are here, because not all service providers have to issue out WEAs, wireless emergency alerts. I'm seeing a trend where I only see U.S. Cellular issuing them. I've literally stood in rooms where 4 cell phones will be there, 4 different providers, and only one person's message was sent or received. So it is impacting us from response and then our ability to communicate with the public. And then the challenges that we're seeing with the public wanting to enroll, or they don't have internet. So they think that they don't realize that the limitation of the infrastructure, it's not what we're trying to provide. It's just, there's no way to get it there to them. So those are some of the challenges. I've heard some discussion in other areas of FirstNet. I've been tracking that and working with Bay Area on projects before coming here, and I can tell you that FirstNet is maybe 150 cell towers throughout the state, and most likely we might get one of them, right? There's, it's just, they're not, it's supposed to be concentrated on rural counties, and I think this group has already recognized, Supervisor Williams and Mr. West, I'm sorry, I don't know who your title, San Francisco, big jurisdictions historically aren't sharing the pie. And I can speak from the concept of emergency management in our grants, and it's based on population density. The Urban Area Security Initiative is that grant alone, 90% of the grant goes to a couple core cities that only cover 20% of the population. And then when you combine that with the fact that rural counties are much more susceptible to wildfire, active shooters, any of the major threats, we're going to end up having those threats. And then by pulling all your resources into the big cities, right? This is the other thing that people don't think about. When you have San Francisco firefighters showing up as mutual aid to Mendocino County, yes, we get cost share, but we're paying San Francisco wages. So even our 5%, 6% is exponentially bloated because we're bringing in very expensive staff to an area where our wages aren't comparable. And so the smarter move is putting the resources out in the areas where you're needed and then redeploying them from there, so you're not paying bloated wages and such for responses. And I'm just speaking from looking at it. I've done this, and we actually did some research papers. This same concept goes when we're deploying resources out to islands, out in FEMA areas, out in Hawaii and in Indonesia and such, all the way to how we're structured within the country. And that's lobbying. They've lobbied for those funds, and we're not getting an equal share where the threat is actually at risk. I'm going to kind of stop there. Again, I just hearing some of the comments that you guys have made, but the biggest challenge that I'm seeing on the emergency services side is the public's expectation for notification and what they think we can do versus what our infrastructure and resources, and Supervisor Williams nailed it. The buildings are we've done a great job of using things to the fullest, but it's time that we really start looking ahead and what our strategic plan is to get them up to date, because we're falling behind. And there's only so much new radios can do when we're piggybacking off of the infrastructure. There's only so much I can do with the alert and warning system if the infrastructure isn't going to send the message. So thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Does anyone have questions or comments on this item?
Brent, this is Kathy Wiley. I'm just wondering, do you have a number of the people, an estimate of the people that can't be reached by the emergency communications pushes?
I don't. I have numbers on who registers. The system will tell me when we send alerts. But say like the wireless emergency alert, I can just say that the message went out, but because it goes from FEMA to all the different infrastructures, it'll confirm the message was sent. But there's no there's no feed on how many cell, because it goes out as a radio signal. And for that emergency alert, the public doesn't realize it. It looks like a text message on their phone, but it's different than the SMS text message they receive. So I can only really kind of get statistics on landlines, emails, text messages. We could do comparison to population density, the challenge, and then also the service providers in those areas. The problem is that service providers, Verizon, AT&T, they're very guarded. So even if you try to invite them all, say I've made this recommendation in the past, let's just have them all show up and we'll do where their coverage areas are, and they can brief us on their capabilities. And they also have teams that will come in and help you set up Muse and temporary nets and such. They're willing to do that one-on-one, but they won't do that as, to show the competitors where their service providers are. And so it's really hard to, who's going to help me and who can actually provide a service.
Do you have an estimate on how many people in the county have signed up then?
Yeah, we have different registration aspects. I can get you those numbers. It's a little tricky in the aspect that each year we pay for MSEG data, which is the service providers have to sell us landlines. They don't have to sell us wireless numbers. So every couple of years we update the hard information that we can get. And so people don't realize sometimes they're actually pulled into the system anyway, businesses and all that. But VoIP and cell phones have to be registered on their own. But I can try to figure out how to pull those numbers apart for you if you like.
I'm just not trying to make extra work for you. I'm just wondering, do we think we're reaching half of the population? Just sort of a ballpark.
When it comes to, I could give you what the registration number is. And we put a little video out the other week. So we're really working on a lot of different aspects of communication. But when it comes to just the cell phone, I would say, in the highly dense areas, we're probably reaching about half of people who actually register. But what doesn't take into account is in the last year, now we're using the wireless alert. So you don't have to register or anything like that. So there's no way to tell if they're just going to get it if they're in the area. We're using EAS and radio and television. In the last couple of fires, if you heard that whining on the TV or the radio, that was our messaging going out. Social media, all these different platforms. So those are hard to see. So I would say that the saturation of all these different tools it's hard to escape that messaging unless you're in your car, not listening to radio or doing anything. You're probably going to get some type of inundation if you have any device on you.
Thanks again.